Salete, and welcome to the Sunday, January, not December, but January 17th, 2016 edition of Virtual Mentoring for Latin Teachers. And today we're going to be talking about a number of things. Our official title is, Reconsidering Goals and Pacing. And that came out of a number of things. It came out of a bunch of conversations in the past few weeks on the Latin Teacher Idea Exchange Facebook group. And it came out of some off-list conversations with a number of people, several of whom are planning to be here today, about the fact that it's coming to be the middle of the year. And for those of us that have been teaching for a while, we know that that means a number of things. It means things are starting to look up a little bit. If the fall was rough, then you've probably established some kind of rhythm and a routine. You've probably rested a little bit with winter break. A new semester is either just about to begin or may have just begun, depending on the particular schedule in your world. And there's just a whole bunch of things that start to happen. But then you also realize that May or June or whenever the school year ends for you is going to be here before you know it. And that maybe that ambitious plan and goal that you had for the year, you may not possibly get to do all of those things. Or maybe you will. Maybe you're ahead of schedule and you're realizing, oh, we can do all kinds of things that I didn't think we would have time to do. More often, of course, for those of us that are veterans, it's a combination of all of the above. There's some things that we realize that we can't do. There's some things that we realize we have time to do. So it's an exciting time. And it's a time that you also start thinking about, well, what might I start to think about doing differently next year? You're probably not at the point of really making plans for that yet, but you're getting to the point where you can do a few things. And you can start to think about a few things that will be different in the future. So it's a really interesting time in the teaching world, and I'm excited to talk about whatever you guys decide that you do want to talk about. We have some guests that are just about to join us. And I know I have one person who just messaged me to say that she's finishing up a tutoring session and she'll be along. And then I know there are a couple of other folks that will be along a little bit so that we'll really have a conversation. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for them, on behalf of you folks who are watching and folks who will be watching later, a couple of the other areas where I know we want to talk about and I know we want to focus on are things that came up in the Latin Teacher Idea Exchange Facebook group over the last week or so. There's been a lot of questions. There's a huge conversation about pacing and what is realistic pacing for students in different kinds of contexts. That led in turn to a conversation about about methodology and approaches, because obviously methodologies and approaches to teaching significantly affect what you can do as in terms of the pace that you set. There's not a single, well, let me just go ahead and say, I don't think there's such a thing as a single perfect approach. But I do think that there are things that can lead to being more or less effective in particular contexts. I don't think that it's very easy to make blanket statements about what those things are, but I do think that it's important to think about it, to say to yourself, is this working? Is this getting the results that I want? And if this, whatever it is, isn't working and isn't getting the results that you want, what might I do differently? Oh, excellent. We have somebody just saying that they're listening in for a short while, although they don't want to join us today. They just sent me an email. So salve to them. I'll preserve this person's anonymity since they didn't want to be publicly on the air with us. But I'm excited that there's so much interest in this topic, because I do think that goals and pacing and everything go together in really important ways. So there was this conversation about what's the appropriate pace given this particular person's situation, which was a challenging one. There is a great question, a couple of other great questions, and yay, Ashley has joined us. Hi, welcome. Yay, it worked.
Yeah, it does. I'm in my car right now. I finished up very quickly with my students, so I'm going to stay parked for a little bit and try to listen in.
Great. Well, welcome. It is good to have you with us. I'm so glad that you're with us because I hate just sort of talking to the world in general. It's not as much fun as it could be.
No, I understand.
when we've got people there. So good. Yay. Welcome. And since this is your first time with us, could you tell us just a little bit about your context and teaching situation? I'll do the same, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Well, what I'm actually doing is something a little new. I have twins who are 5, and I stopped, in the classroom about 5 years ago, just because it's hard with babies. So I am actually teaching online right now. I tried to go back to work part-time, and part-time Latin doesn't exist. I still had 3 or 4 preps, and it was kind of a nightmare with little ones at home. So I'm doing online, and right now I'm actually creating some content for kids to do for a county. And it's working out really well, but I need a lot of media, and that it doesn't always exist. I'm not textbook bound, which is nice, but scary. So yeah, I'm just always looking for new ideas. And because we're online, I'm trying to do more contextual pieces, getting them to actually use the language more, compose more, but staying within the grammar and staying within, what's easy for them. I'm not looking for essays, but writing simple Latin sentences to make sure that they're understanding the grammar. And so that's authentic, and I don't have to worry as much about cheating because all the translations are out there now. So.
Oh, yes, I know that because that's very similar to my circumstances. I work as online as well and have for the last couple of years. After a long time face to face, it just got to the point that it was time for me to make a change. I needed to make a change.
Yeah.
So I have a physical group. I'm in northern New Jersey, whom I work with from my home in North Carolina. And then I have a bunch of homeschooling families around the country. And our numbers for the homeschoolers are really growing in exciting ways. And like you, I've had the wonderful opportunity to get away from using a textbook. I don't like textbooks. And I had to rethink everything that I did along the way for the same reasons that you did, because yeah, I mean, as kids have more and more access to technology, the kinds of things that used to be done, that people used to be sent home with as homework assignments don't work because there's Google Translate, there's the internet, there's every possible tool out there that makes sort of a late 19th, early 20th century approach to teaching Latin not work anymore.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah, so you really have to rethink everything. And I think that a lot of our colleagues who are still in physical classrooms haven't realized how much the world has changed for them, even though they really have. I mean, even though they're facing the same realities. The folks who send their kids home to, translate line such and so through such and so of such and so story and so book, and then are amazed and shocked that their students, quote, turned in this flawless translation, unquote, but really learned nothing from the process. Well, no, they didn't learn anything from the process because I know where they went, and so do you.
Yeah, exactly.
But
they don't seem to understand that I have the internet too.
I know, it's so funny. It is so funny because yeah, we do also have the internet. Although evidently some of our colleagues, including some who are online, don't seem to have the internet either because they're just so surprised that this happens. And I'm thinking, really? So yeah, it's an exciting new world, and I love it. But it does change and challenge everything that you do as a teacher.
Yeah,
big difference. So tell me about some of the things, or tell us about some of the things the cool things that you're doing, because I really am always glad to hear about those.
Well, some of the things that I'm doing right now is I've gone with a thematic approach. That's been difficult to do, to go with the thematic approach. Um, just because you don't have as many resources. So one of the things that I'm doing right now is having the kids, one of the activities I'm setting up is have the kids do a comic strip of one of the hero stories. So they're reading it in English, they come up with a vocab list. And so what I've been doing is putting them through the process. What vocab words are going to be useful for you? What nouns are involved? What actions? What feelings? How would you describe your character? Things like that. And then they get to actually write like kind of like a summary, and then they illustrate it. And so what I do along the way is provide feedback. Could you put more adjectives? Could you use more adverbs? Maybe try to see if you can add some participle phrases in here. And so among those 2 weeks that they're in this module, they're working with vocab, they're working with like the sentences, and then finally they're putting it all together for a final product. So I'm not just assigning it and say, write a Latin summary. I'm kind of walking them through the stages so that I can give them feedback along the way. So that's my new approach for this semester. So I'm going to see how that works out. I start a new semester in February. I'm excited with what we're doing. I'm doing a lot of exposure to real Latin. So I start out every module with 5 quotes where they deal with the theme, and they're not going to be able to translate it all themselves. They click on it, it reveals the translation, and then it reveals the context about it. Then after they've gone through all 5 quotes, I ask them grammar questions, partly so I can point out to them, you might not know every word, but I bet you can identify the tense or the person or the case. So I'm still staying with the grammar, still reviewing, or ask them what the vocab word is, something like that. So that's kind of my process right now. So we'll see how it goes.
Oh, that sounds good. I like the way that you're that you're doing that, because I do think that one of the themes that we've talked about a lot this fall was bringing in authentic resources as early as you possibly can and helping kids see that, it's not, okay, I don't necessarily know every word in this, but I can feel the structure, or, oh, actually, I do know most of the words in this. But, so it's exciting. It's very different. I mean, it challenges folks who are used to kind of a linear, well, yesterday we worked with pages 74 through 76, so tomorrow we're going to work with,
and I wouldn't have done this had it not been for getting rid of the textbook.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Not having a textbook, I feel freed, which is nice. But scared at the same time because there's not as many resources out there, or at least I haven't found them yet.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that there are and aren't. In some ways there are more, but we just have to find them all.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
In other ways there are less, because you may have hated the book, but at least you knew that that thing was there on page 77.
Yeah, exactly.
There are those days that you just really wish that page 77 was still there, but it's not still there.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, I would not go back. I wouldn't go back to the textbook thing. Actually, the last few years that I taught in a physical classroom, we went textbookless simply because I discovered, I had this amazing conversation, and I've told this story a few times in this space, but not to you, so I'll tell it again. Everybody who's heard this story, just tune out for a minute. So several years ago now, 7 or 8 years ago now, I had this really wonderful group of Latin students, and they loved me, and I loved them, and they loved Latin, but they hated this one particular activity that we did periodically, and they would just rush through it and do the worst possible job and get it done as quickly as possible. And it wasn't just that they did it one time; it was every time we did used this particular structure, they just hated it. So finally, one day, I thought, I'm going to ask them why. So, it's like a 20-minute activity. And I walked over to them and said, guys, could you tell me why it is that you don't like this activity? Because I know you don't. I know you hate it. And they said, well, it's just that it uses the book more than the other things that we do, and we hate the textbook. And I said, okay, well, I'm not crazy about it either, but so tell me, what is it about it that you don't like? And they said, it's flat and dead. Characters are stupid, the stories are unrealistic, and it's just dumb, and so we hate it. I said, well, I could show you a worse textbook if you'd like. And they said, oh, please don't. But of course, by then I had gotten out a worse textbook, and so they said, "Okay, no, you're right. That one was worse." But we just don't like textbooks in general. They said because they're all like that in every subject. And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, "No, you guys are absolutely right. They are. What should we do instead?" And they said, "Well, I mean, we like Latin. We like what we do. We like the class. We like you. We like the language. Um, we like the real stuff that we read from time to time. We like the when we make up stories together. We like that. Couldn't we just do that?" And I said, "Well, I mean, we could. And how hard would that be?" Well, then that opens an enormous, giant,
Yeah.
multi-year project that is still ongoing of doing this. But it was so freeing to hear, from the primary customers, right? To hear from the kids. We love the language, but we just hate this approach to teaching it, which was an approach that I was increasingly, hating as well. And yeah, so wherever you are along that road, I know some of our watchers are just sort of like, give up and others are farther along the road than either of us. I wish that Alan Van Nart was able to be here today. He messaged me to say that he couldn't come, but Alan is doing a huge amount of work with using authentic resources to construct thematic units in a really wonderful way, so that they're like pulling from throughout the history of Latin literature, but they're thematically connected, and it's just phenomenal.
It's a big project to do that. So yeah, I would love to see more of that and get more of those resources, because I think the kids would benefit from it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, is that I know what I do and what I use and what I put together, and I'm happy to share those things. But it's hard, and it would be wonderful with all the people who are doing this if all of us knew about each other. Because oftentimes we don't. I mean, if there are those little sort of pockets of ways that we can communicate with each other, with idea exchange on the one hand, and the best practices email list, and a couple of other ways that people communicate with each other. But then there's so many Latin teachers out there who are doing what we're doing, but they don't know about us, and we don't know about them. We don't know about each other, and it's kind of, it's kind of scary and exciting all at the same time. I'm going to look over and see. Somebody said they were going to message me about a thing. And let's see. No, that's not. Oh, good. Okay. I have to leave that open, because if I don't, I will discover to my great sorrow that somebody sent me 52 messages saying, "I'm trying to join the Hangout and I can't." But yeah, so, I mean, there's just so much that we can do. And then at the same time, because there's so much that we can do, and because it can be so interest driven, and it can be so unique to our particular situations, it's a great freedom. But then at the same time, it's also really, really scary, because you're thinking, well, what, am I covering all the things?
Yeah, exactly.
Doing the things that we need to be able to do. What is there an external measure that I'm aiming kids for? If so, are they going to be prepared for it? And that's one of the things. I mean, in some ways, we're fortunate that a lot of times we don't have the kind of sort of immediate term external measures that there are in some areas. There's not a state test for every level.
Yeah.
There's not a district created final exam or whatever. But on the other hand, as bad as those things can be, and as constricting as those things can feel, the nice thing about them is at least
Yeah, exactly. You know where your kids are.
Yeah. Where your kids are, that you're doing the same thing as that a bunch of people have agreed on as, being some kind of a minimum floor of competency for that level. Whereas, when I step away from that, do I in fact know that my kids are at this level? I think I do. I mean, I have the same kinds of things that you have yours do. I have mine do to show me what they can do, and I'm satisfied, and they're satisfied, and they feel like they're growing and learning, and I feel like they are. And I compare them with students that I taught over those 22 years in physical classrooms, and it seems like they're doing the same sorts of things, but are they? Is my memory does memory serve? And so, yeah, so how do we then, if we're all doing all these different things, which we should be doing, I think, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I think we should be looking at students' interests and letting that drive the curriculum to a significant degree. And I think that we should be designing a lot of our own stuff, and I'm not a big believer in textbooks at all. But given that, how do we then make it so that there's some kind of a common expectation of what it is that we want our students to be able to do at the end of this level or that level?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we measure that so that they can show really more, I think it's more for me, so that they can prove to themselves that they can do whatever this thing is. And I don't have a good answer to that. So I hope you do. Because if you do, that would be great.
What I did when I started creating this course was I started going off of the National Latin exam, because it was the only external measure that I had for level 1, level 2. And that's what I'm teaching right now, is just those lower levels. But for me, when I reflect back on my traditional classroom experience, there was a lot of translation. And could my kids translate textbook? Yes. But what I really have started shifting my focus to is having kids focus on what they know and what they can figure out. For me, the process of reading a passage is much more important than being able to literally translate it. So just because you don't know all the adverbs in the sentence, or you might not know the prepositional phrase, can you get the idea? And so I've been focusing on getting the idea of the passage. So look at your subject, look at your verb. What do you know about the tense? What do you try to figure those things out. And for me, that's more important almost. That's the most important part. I want them to know the grammar. I do have quizzes that are, explicitly testing the grammar. But what I'm hoping out of these kind of projects at the end is I can see their process. I can give them a piece of unseen literature, or a passage that's, adapted for their level. And they can not look at it and go, I don't know all these words. That was the thing that I was noticing, is that kids got into the habit of having every single word for them. And that's not what I wanted them to be able to do. I wanted them to look at a passage and say, what can I figure out? Because I think that's how they should approach not just Latin, but everything else. They kind of get stuck on the fact that they don't know everything and they quit. And that was the mentality that I really wanted to stop, because that's not purposeful, that's not growing. And so I think the objective for me right now is, can they look at a passage and figure out what they do know and not get overwhelmed? Look for, evidence of English derivatives, things like that. So for me, that's kind of been my focus. And then summarizing main ideas from passages. I want them to literally translate, but I don't want that to be the only thing they're doing, and for that to be like their end goal. If that all makes sense.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I've really been helped by in my process has been the actual proficiency guidelines, and specifically the way that they're summarized in Linguafolio. I don't know if that's a thing that you've ever seen.
I've looked at it, and I have not. I've heard about it, and I've looked at it. I think you posted something recently, or someone did.
I did.
And I was kind of looking through it, but I have not delved into it.
Yeah, it's a really remarkable thing, because what it does, or at least the way that the self-assessment grid descriptors have been written, it just changes everything. Let me see if I can do a screen share here. It will be exciting because I don't usually do those, but here, screen share. There we go. Yeah, so here we go. And this isn't big enough to see, so let me make it a little bit bigger. But this is the folio self-assessment grid here, and what you can see is that there are rows of the different different modes of communication, interpretive and interpersonal and presentational, and then there are columns for the different proficiency levels. And obviously, where I spend most of my time with kids is with the interpretive reading area because that's the biggest
Mm-hmm.
thing that we do. But to go from the novice low, where you can identify some words or phrases, um, up to understanding the main idea, um, and some details in a simple text with familiar vocabulary, which is not as high, which is where you are by the end of Latin 1, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then to get up to understand the main idea and many details, as long as there's familiar vocabulary, to understand most details when there's familiar vocabulary and main ideas, even when there's some unfamiliar vocabulary. Moving up to intermediate high, understanding lots of different types of text, even when there's unfamiliar vocabulary. End of Latin 4-ish, right? And then
Yeah.
the subtleties of text on familiar topics, understanding long complex texts and recognizing literary and technical styles, advanced mid, which is what we're asking our AP kids to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly helpful. It is just incredibly helpful for me to see the progression, because then, and there's the progression in all of the modes in terms of,
Mm-hmm.
writing, going from copying some characters to being able to express simple kinds of ideas in words and phrases, to moving up to phrases and sentences, moving up to a series of sentences, to connected sentences, to discourse level
Mm-hmm.
things. And it's just, to me, it is really powerful to not just to see that for ourselves, but also to share this kind of a thing with kids and say, okay, so where do you think you are?
Mm-hmm.
We, in the course of a 9 or so week marking period with my school-based kids, will do probably a couple of pair or group projects and a couple of individual assessment things, where at the end of which I'll ask you to tell me where do you think you are, and then I'll tell you where I think where you've
Mm-hmm.
demonstrated that you are, and then that converts into you can convert that easily enough into a number for grading purposes. But the thing that I find most exciting is to watch kids grow, for them to be able to see, I'm here, and this is where I'm going. This is the next step. And if a kid is unhappy with where they are, or they feel like they're stuck, and they say, well, what should I do? What should I work on? You say, well, okay, where are we on this scale? What in this next level up, what can you do? What can't you do yet? What should we work on? What should you work on in order to be able to do that? And sometimes it's, I just really need to read more. Sometimes it's, well, I actually do need to study vocabulary, but I need to pick out the words that I don't know, and I need to focus on those.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's, oh, those endings, they actually are important.
Yeah. And that was the thing. They were always just like memorizing charts, and like you need to know the chart, and like but I wanted to take that focus off of, it's not just about the chart. Like the chart, the Romans didn't just look at a chart to figure out whether they wanted to do the subject or the direct object. And so like really looking at that sentence structure and patterns and like language versus it's just a chart and I have to memorize it and then that's it. Like I'm just trying to take the focus off of that.
Yeah, I think that's so important because yeah, I mean, the way that we present that chart is just like the way that teachers in lots of other areas present their charts. And in most of those cases, those charts, the only purpose of memorizing them is so that you can reproduce them on the test. Mm-hmm. And then you forget about them. That shouldn't be how it is, but that is how it is. And unfortunately, then I think, after you've done that for years, as a student, you come in with the expectation of, okay, here's a chart, I know what to do with that.
Yeah.
But then what you don't realize is, oh, you mean we have to actually use it?
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that. We never did that.
Yeah.
And such and so, we didn't do that. I mean, she just yelled at us because we didn't reproduce the chart. So, then I'll give kids the chart, obviously, but then I'll tell them, what do I want you to do with it? I want you to use it until it's internalized. And here's how we're going to use it until it's internalized. And I've had kids get mad at me and say, will you not just give us a darn quiz on the chart? No, I won't, actually. Because why won't I? Because what will you then do? And they say, well, I will memorize it. And yes, I know you will. And you'll get a good grade on the quiz, right? Well, yeah. And then what will happen the next week if I asked you about to use the chart or to tell me what you had learned. And they sort of feel like this look, and they realize, well, of course I'll forget about it because that's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But um,
Yeah. So what I've
yeah.
started to do is by having them compose sentences. I used to be one of those people that didn't think, you don't speak it, that's not useful for you. So like, I'm not on board with, talking about what I had at dinner because I don't, like, I don't know the word for spaghetti. Like, that's not useful for
Mhm.
us later. But at the same time, it is useful for them to put everything in the nominative case in their sentence. And then their friend is like, I don't know what's receiving the action. I don't know which one's
Right.
accusative. Like,
Yeah, who
they
killed who?
actually get an understanding of, oh, I have to
Uh,
put that in the accusative for you to be able to understand what I want to say. And
yes.
so
One of
that's
our
the important part.
Right. One of our watchers has made a really good point in a comment that fortunately Google Plus emails me comments, and he says that charts were one of humanist achievements to move students to reading the great authors in the unheard of time
Mm-hmm.
frame of 1 or 2 years. But that does not mean that charts are an end in themselves, of course. But they are a useful and powerful tool for acceleration, and I agree completely. Which is, I think, what we're both saying, that charts are great and
Yeah, and
charts
I
are
mean, like, I
helpful.
use them. My kids
Oh
still
yeah.
use them, but I
Oh, so do
just
I.
want to take the focus off of, like, I've memorized the chart, therefore I understand the declension. Like,
Right,
you understand the endings, and that's great. So now we need to take it a step further, which is what I really want them to do.
right.
So,
Now, can we use these as a tool for communication, whether a tool for understanding or a tool for production, or both? Um, and that's the thing. That's the area where I think that as a discipline, we've really kind of fallen apart in the last 150 years or so. In that, okay, yes, it's great that we emphasize, learn the chart. Yeah, that's you need to do that. But it's as though that somehow has become an end in itself for many people, or they think that by memorizing the chart, then somehow automatically that transfers to an ability to use the chart, and it doesn't. I mean, you know,
mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking of my early days of piano lessons, right? And played a lot of scales. Did I
Mm-hmm.
realize why I needed to play this? No, I played the scales because such and so told me to play the scales, and I was an obedient child and I didn't want to get in trouble. Well, then eventually I started playing things that were not, in the little introductory book, right? And I realized, that's why I had to learn to do
Yeah.
this. I
You
had
have
to
to
learn to
have the
play.
foundation.
Right,
Yeah.
this was the foundation, but it wasn't an end in itself. And fortunately, my piano teacher never made it an end in itself. But I mean, we did warm up with them and we did play them and we did learn them. Well, then, I started playing things that I actually wanted to play, and I realized, it's helpful that I can do this thing. It's helpful that I learned to
Mm-hmm.
cross this finger this way because you have to do that. Um, I learned to. They still called it typing when I was in high school, and I learned to use the keyboard. But then I was in college and was actually having to type things, and I realized papers and stuff. And I realized, it is helpful that I can do this. My speed and accuracy increased because I was doing things that I needed. I could see the purpose of having done those practice sentences. And in fact, at one point, I went and grabbed the practice sentence book and worked on a few of them because there were particular things that were causing trouble for me, that were slowing me down, and I didn't want to be up till 3 in the morning writing this paper. I wanted to be able to be in bed at 2 or something because um, and I think yes. Another great comment here from our person who says, to pull knowing through the chart to comprehend actual discourse gets close to proper use. And yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. In the same way that I don't think I have typed my Homero sentence, which was, a lad had a glad dad, semicolon, dad had half a shad salad. Who would even eat that? Well, no one would eat that, but it did sure teach me the location of the Homero keys. And
Yeah.
then we branched out from there and started doing the whole alphabet and other things. And it wasn't an end in itself. it was made very clear to us that this isn't an end in itself, but no matter what you do in life, you're going to have to be able to use a thing with a QWERTY keyboard, and it sure is helpful to be able to do that without having to stop and think about it. Well, the
I
same
think
thing
so.
with chart.
Yeah, I think sometimes too the kids want to get to the fun stuff and they don't want to always do the work that leads up to the fun stuff. And so it's also making sure that, they realize that you do have to set those foundations. We're going to eventually get to this, but you can't read Caesar or Cicero and not have these foundational things there. It's going to be not going to be good for you. So,
Right.
yeah, and I think that's just kind of helping the kids understand that there is a process, and sometimes getting administrators to understand that there's a process. You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, and I think that it's is unfortunately made more difficult by the fact that for so many years, so many teachers in so many disciplines made memorizing the chart, whatever the chart was, um, or the list, or the whatever, an end in itself, rather than helping people see that knowing it is a tool that helps you. Knowing it is a tool that makes things more efficient, as our viewer commenter said. Um, it's certainly possible to learn a language without reference to formal grammar because every one of us learned our native language that way.
yeah.
Um, and it's certainly possible to learn another language that way because, obviously every Roman child learned to speak Latin quite well to make themselves understood, to use its rather complicated morphological system without sitting down and learning charts. But it took them the same amount of time and immersion that it does us. So if we want to make that process more efficient and bring in our conscious as well as our unconscious processing parts of our brain have everything involved, then yeah, those are useful and important. But they're tools, and I think that it's weird because you see people for whom the tool is an end in itself, and then you see folks overreacting to that and saying things like, "Well, you don't need the tool at all." Well, okay, no, I mean, in some senses, you don't need the tool at all. I theoretically could put up the picture that I really need to put up. Actually, on that little wall right behind me, I could put it up without using any tools, right? I could just bang it into the wall really, really hard, and it might stay. Um, it would be better if I used like a picture hanger and a nail, or actually, I'm thinking about using those command strip things because those things are great, and then you can just. But tools are helpful, and and I could just bang it into the wall really hard until it stayed, but it is not the most efficient way to hang that picture. I could. I don't really have to have a vacuum cleaner. I mean, I could just pick up every piece of dirt on the floor, but it really is helpful, especially with the dog and the cat. It's helpful to have the vacuum. It really helps a lot. And when I had young children, I mean, we could have done without a dish. No, we couldn't have done without a dishwasher.
No.
No, we couldn't have when they were little. Once they got old enough to wash dishes, maybe. But even then, I really like having a dishwasher. I really like having a washing machine. I like having a dryer. They are not strictly necessary, but they sure are helpful. And I think that the same thing is true with charts and vocabulary lists and the other kinds of tools that we've developed as language learning tools, in that they are, not necessary
Yeah.
in the sense that you can learn language without them, but they sure do make the process a little bit more easier, more streamlined, less frustrating.
Yeah, and I think it's just trying to find a happy medium. And again, what works for your situation and for your students, and because that's not always the same. Um,
Exactly.
and they change from semester to semester, the needs and their capabilities. So, sometimes there are things where I have grand plans and it doesn't work. And you always have to step it back. So I think it's just, reacting to what your kids need. So, I do think we need to have a general pacing. Where do we want to be by the end of Latin 1? what grammar
Yeah.
do we want to cover by the end of Latin 1? And so that way, we know where we're going, and
Mhm.
we can make sure that we're meeting those grammar end goals. So
Yeah, and those vocabulary end goals and those reading proficiency
yeah,
end goals. What do we want our kids to be able to do? And I think that is important. I like the National Latin Exam syllabus too for that reason, because it does say, well, these are reasonable expectations for many programs out there. And does that mean that you have to have done every single thing on that by the first week of March? No, but it is nice to have some kind of an agreement about what it
yeah,
is that we're doing. It doesn't have to be a perfect agreement, and then everybody doesn't have to do every single thing on that list, but to have some kind of a general agreement within which we can then work out things that we can take many different paths towards that goal according to what it is that our particular students in our particular context need.
yeah. I am going to have to head out, but I appreciate the call,
Oh,
and I look
absolutely.
forward to another one.
Yes, well, we'll
Thank
be
you.
we'll be back together, I think, around this same time next week. So
Okay,
thanks
great.
again for being with us, and thanks to everybody who's been watching. I think, in fact, because my throat is starting to hurt, that I'm going to
Oh, no.
bring us to an end as well. But I will say, valete omnis spectatores, and Ashley, thanks so much for being with us, and
Gracias.
we will look forward to it the next time. All righty.
Wale.
Valete omnes.